At just over 1 hour into Joe Wright's Atonement, we see the beginning of one of the most iconic Steadicam shots in film history. 5 minutes of an uncut sequence that follows Robbie around the beach in Dunkirk as he begins to take in the chaos around him. And accompanying this scene, we hear Dario Marionellis' Elegy for Dunkirk. A piece that seems impossible to unbind from this single, continuous shot. The music wraps itself around the film, placing the harrowing scenes in a new, emotional context as the cello sings out a keening melody. This melody is built on top of slowly moving chords in strings, a continuous cycle of suspensions in the middle parts, and transparent countermelodies in the highest violins. As we move closer to the stand at the centre of the beach, we hear one of the most effortless examples of the score mixing with diegetic music. Parry's hymn tune, Dear Lord and Father of Mankind, is taken in by the music, or maybe the other way round. The harmonic language of the score barely changes, but each works perfectly with the other. A sung lament mixed with a lament in strings. But as the camera moves away and as the men sing of the still, small voice of calm, the solo cello returns, singing out its elegy once again. It would seem at first, from the title and from the context, that this music is simply a lament for the men and women of Dunkirk, for the soldiers trapped on the beach, and for Robbie, trapped by circumstance. But there is far more to this music, and to understand this, we need to go back to the beginning of the story. The first noises we hear in Atonement are these: clicking keys and aggressive returns, the sounds of a typewriter which morphs quietly into a mechanical, repeating piano note. And the music very quickly takes on board these sounds, an example of transdiegesis, where a diegetic film sound has become a component of the incidental score. In the first few seconds of the film, a bridge has been constructed between music and narrative. The music is an extension of the sounds of the typewriter, and so is also an extension and manifestation of Briony Tallis's story. This is something that's made obvious by the use and also absence of music in the first act. Whenever Briony is the focal character, whenever we see the story from her point of view, we hear Marionellis' score. But in any other context, when the story is being told from another perspective, there is no music. Just look at the two versions of the library scene. The first, which follows Briony, is accompanied by a chromatic rising passage in strings. But when we see the scene for what it really is, the first intimate moment between Robbie and Cecilia, we hear nothing.
I love you.
The music in Atonement
I love you.
Is Briony's music. It's her story, after all.
Because the novel is autobiographical, is that right?
Yes, entirely. I haven't changed any names, including my own.
We realise retrospectively from the epilogue that everything after the first act is Briony's version of the story, constructed from first-hand accounts of Robbie and Cecilia's time in France and London. And now that the story is being told entirely by Bryony, her music can develop and grow alongside the narrative. Act 2 begins with a new melodic idea, introduced first as diegetic music, played by Mace on a solo harmonica. This is music that is far more melancholic than anything we've heard up till this point, and delineates the bright, hazy glow of Act 1 from the cold, dark world of Act 2. But this idea turns very quickly into something more poetic. It turns into a love theme, becoming associated with the memory of Cecilia and Robbie's brief time together, but also with the future that they still might share. But this isn't the only musical idea that speaks of love, of the past, and of their potential future. Bryony gives us one more idea. This is the first time in the film where we hear these chords.
Dearest Cecilia.
And it's also one of only 3 moments in the score where this idea is used.
The one I had been planning on that evening walk. I can become again the man who once crossed
the second time is when Robbie arrives at Dunkirk, accompanied by a new melody, played by a solo cello.
Made love to you in the library.
And the third time is during the final moments of the film.
I'm sorry. Could we stop for a moment?
Of course, is something the matter?
When Bryony tells us what really happened in this story.
I had for a very long time decided to tell the absolute truth.
Your new novel, your 21st, is called Atonement.
Instead of returning from Dunkirk and living a life with Cecilia, Robbie died of septicemia on the last day of the evacuation, and Cecilia was killed following an explosion of the water mains above Balham tube station as she sheltered from the bombing raids above. Elegy for Dunkirk is not just an elegy for the suffering of men and women in war, but for Robbie and for Cecilia and the life they could have lived together. The music in this film is the way we hear Bryony's narrative voice. It speaks of her truth, her sorrow for what she has done, but also her attempt to rebuild something, rebuild a life that she has destroyed. This is what a story can do best, after all. Stories can present a world that is far better than our own. They can bring something back to life that has been lost, and can give us a chance to create something that might not be a reality, but is more honest and more true than the truth can ever be.